have to really escalate the noise we make so that we'll be heard.
Welcome to Gay USA. I'm Andy Hum.
I'm Ann Northrup.
And I don't know if we actually did win a fake news award today, but...
My prediction is they didn't hold the fake news awards today, but we'll see who's right.
I hope one goes to the doctor who examined him, who says he's 239 pounds. We want you to take the Gay USA challenge, Mr. President, and come in here and get weighed.
That's Andy's thing. I have no involvement.
Okay. All right. We have a lot of serious news this week, some of which involves the president and a lot of which does not. And we start off with the very sad news that Dr. Mathilde Krim, a true giant in the field of fighting AIDS, has died at the age of 91.
We're going to show you a couple of videos relating to her that I think will be enlightening and important. Also in the news, the Trump administration deported a gay married asylum seeker against the wishes of the court, and then the court brought him back. It's a crazy story.
So, if you're upset about all this, we're all going to get out and join the Women's March this weekend. There'll be a big one in New York on Saturday, but they're going to be across the country on Saturday and Sunday. Check your local listings.
Chelsea Manning, fresh out of prison, is going to challenge an incumbent Democratic senator in Maryland.
In Wisconsin, there was a big settlement reached for the transgender student Ash Whitaker, who was discriminated against by the local school district there.
In Lake Forest, California, a young gay man has been viciously murdered by a former classmate.
In Brooklyn, a lesbian who was raped 24 years ago and defamed by the Daily News and the New York Police Department has finally gotten some measure of justice.
Too little, too late.
Yes.
Almost all of Latin America is currently debating whether to comply with the international court decision ordering marriage equality.
And we're going to review Fellow Travelers, which we saw together, a timely opera about McCarthy-era witch hunts of gay people in government.
But we start with a loving remembrance of Dr. Mathilde Krim, who has been described everywhere as a warrior in the fight against HIV and AIDS, as well she was.
Yes.
And a warrior in many ways, even before she got to that.
She was 91 years old, and she grew up in Europe in a very mixed background in Europe. Spoke about 4 or 5 languages. A Swiss father, Austrian mother, and she went to the University of Geneva in 1945, where she had a lot of Jewish friends in school, and she converted to Judaism. And she joined the Irgun in Israel, which were the gun runners underground in the War for Independence there.
She was helping run guns. Did she convert because she married?
No, she converted.
Well, she did have a first marriage.
She converted because she encountered, these friends at the University of Geneva, and she was so, as we all were, but obviously a lot of us not enough, so appalled by what happened in Europe. And in fact, what happened in Europe to Jews is what informed her work in AIDS. I mean, she was a scientist and a researcher, an eminent cancer researcher.
Exactly.
She did a lot of the early research into cancer-causing viruses. But then she met, and she did this work in Israel, where she was a part of an institute there. Then she met Arthur Krim, who was the head of United Artists, and moved to New York with him. He was on the board of the institute in Israel, and she
the Weizmann Institute.
Yeah, moved to New York with him in 1958. And she played a very important role in America in getting the National Cancer Act of 1971 passed. Remember Nixon's war on cancer?
Absolutely.
It's still going on. Then she met Joe Sonnabend, who was a doctor who was encountering patients in 1980 what eventually we came to know as AIDS, and they started talking about it. So within a couple of years, she forms the AIDS Medical Foundation, later called AMFAR, to get boost research into it.
Yes, and along the way, as she was getting involved at the very beginning of our knowledge of the AIDS epidemic, she encountered Elizabeth Taylor, who on the West Coast was, of course, getting deeply involved in this, and they joined forces to form AMFAR, and both worked for decades on it after then.
So she and Arthur have a townhouse on the Upper East Side where they both had fundraisers with all these celebrities, but they also would have meetings with activists.
I was at one of those meetings.
Me as well. And I remember a reporter friend of mine from the New York Native, a gay paper, called her up, was going to have an interview with her, and he said, what apartment number is it? And she goes, it's a house, my dear, is what she said. She was very low-key.
I was there with a bunch of activists for a meeting. We're discussing strategy, and the butler is passing out, tea and crumpets or whatever.
I know.
It was quite a scene, but a beautiful house.
Yes, with Oscars on the piano.
But she was truly a dedicated warrior, and she wasn't just a dilettante in this. And we want to show you a couple of things. First, the tribute that AMFAR did, a couple of minutes of video that will show you.
From some years ago.
Yes, and it was the side of her that this shows is how she, as a fundraiser and as a lobbyist, brought attention to the epidemic by, in particular in her connection with Elizabeth Taylor, but with Arthur Krim as her husband, was able to reach out to a high-powered celebrity community to raise money and awareness. So
especially because she had listened to her friends talking about the people dying of AIDS the way people talked about Jews in Germany.
Yes, well, we'll get to that in the second piece of video, but let's start with this tribute from AMFAR to Mathilde Krim.
Dr. Mathilde Krim marshaled others to establish the American Foundation for AIDS Research, raising awareness, raising millions for research, and raising the hopes of countless people bravely confronting this deadly disease.
For 3 decades, Dr. Mathilde Krim has been a leader in the fight against AIDS.
I became involved in HIV research in the spring of '81, and we had a sense of urgency. We had the people around us dying every day.
From the outset of her scientific research on HIV/AIDS, Dr. Krim boldly confronted broader social and political questions about the epidemic.
The AIDS crisis has also become a crisis of public confusion about the nature of the epidemic, and also a moral crisis.
Her courage and her thoughtful advocacy, her willingness to confront and challenge fear and prejudice, changed the public conversation about AIDS.
Mathilde Krim called me and invited me to visit her in New York. And that afternoon, I had an awakening. From that time on, I have been a foot soldier in the battle on HIV/AIDS.
Please welcome a true hero and someone I idolize, Dr. Mathilde Krim.
It is important that leadership in the AIDS crisis include countering prejudice and discrimination.
In the course of her brilliant career, Dr. Mathilde Krim has shown us that the benefits of scientific research will only be as great as our understanding and compassion allow.
We want to continue believing and teaching that each human life has the same value as any other.
So the other video we want to show you is from a local interview years ago. It may even have been an M&N interview, I'm not sure, for a show or a series called Totally Cool, where she was interviewed by a local guy named Richard Renda. And in this, what I like about this is that she sits down and talks about the real beginning of our observation of the epidemic and how our understanding of it evolved at the very, very beginning, and how her understanding of it evolved not only scientifically, but socially in terms of the discrimination. And I think it's, in its own quiet way, a very powerful and brief but poignant description of what went on long before many of us were involved in activism.
To be facing, it was an extraordinary situation also, to realize that you were seeing the birth of a new disease. We didn't know anything about it. And little by little, we could, by studying the early patients, eliminate certain possible causes. At first we thought drugs or what people eat or drink or do, but quickly we could eliminate those as a reason for this disease. And we came to the conclusion that it must be an infectious disease, it must be transmissible. And as soon as the first women and the first babies and the first old folks who had received blood transfusion came down with it, we could also say it's an infectious agent, that it's transmissible through blood and sex. And that was late 1981, 1982. It was very early. We had that suspicion. So then, an infectious agent, that we know microbes don't distinguish between gay, straight, female, male, young or old. We became very frightened. That,
you knew this in 81?
I would say 82, that we knew we were going to face an epidemic and it was going to affect everybody. Let's say in the mid 80s, after the virus was identified, and it took a few months to really convince ourselves that a new virus was involved, we also realized that this virus was not making sometimes people sick, that the rule was that somebody who acquired the virus also developed full-blown AIDS. We know today that there are some exceptions, but we know there are very few exceptions. And so we were dealing with a disease that was not only transmissible, serious, but lethal most of the time. And it was really scary. And what was scary too was the reaction of our authorities and the public in general, saying it's them, it's people who don't deserve attention and help and so on. Or not believing that they would say it's only gay sex who transmits this virus, and we knew full well it was not only gay sex. For a long time, even our Department of Health here in New York was calling, the gay bars places of risk. They tried to close them, but the straight, public accommodations for sexual orgies were not closed.
Well, isn't it true that it wasn't until the summer of 1985 that the government admitted that heterosexuals could get AIDS?
Yeah, that's true too. That's what I'm talking about. Exactly. So we were saying it, but we were blowing in the wind. I mean, the authorities, the people that the public respects and listens to, were saying nothing. Let alone the religious authorities, who were saying the opposite of what we scientists were saying, and it made of the whole issue an issue of morality, which was ridiculous. And we're we're whipping up discrimination and prejudice.
Right.
Early insight.
Yes. I mean, the epidemic was driven by bigotry, and she knew that, and that's one of the reasons she was so passionate about it. She initially came into it, she studied interferon, and she thought that might have a role in this. It turned out it didn't in terms of solving the problem, but she wanted investment in whatever could work. Mark Harrington of Treatment Action Group says that she was a tremendous ally in their fight to institute Parallel Track, which got 35,000 people on DDI, which was the first drug drug fallback from AZT in those days, and it helped save a lot of lives.
She was also one of the first, long before ACT UP and TAG came along, to object to placebo trials and say that would extend the time before we got drugs and were inappropriate.
And she and her groups invested in needle exchange programs when everybody in the government was fighting it and allowing it to get out of control. In this country, they had needle exchange in Europe, and they didn't have an HIV epidemic among injecting drug users. But we refused in this country. But she tried to stop that.
And one of her real impetuses for getting involved with this and understanding it so clearly, so quickly, was her experience with the Holocaust and seeing the parallels and the stigma and the genocide.
I wish her voice were here today, because she'd be saying the same thing about what we're going through right now.
And Liz Taylor, too.
Yes, and this is a woman who literally could be said to have saved the lives of millions of people by the work that she did.
And the two of them together, what a team.
We're tremendously sad about losing her.
But happy she lived a long and certainly enormously productive life, dying at 91.
Yes, she was the one who hosted Mandela when he got out of jail in the United States at her house to raise money. She was a lifelong supporter of the African National Congress, not just like a late one. She always supported that. So it's all of a piece, folks.
A visionary.
All of a piece.
And an activist.
Yes, we miss her.
Yeah. All right. Well, in her honor, perhaps, we will be out this weekend marching against the Trump administration, marking the one-year anniversary of his inauguration.
Which seems to have hit a new low this week, if that's possible.
Well, I just want to tell people, if you do not yet know what's going on in your area and you want to find a march near you, just Google Women's March 2018 with your location, and you'll find information about what's going on. Here in New York, we're gathering on Central Park West, north of Columbus Circle, Saturday morning, and marching down Broadway and 6th Avenue to Bryant Park.
We should be having big protests just for what happened in the last week. The Justice Department, they still call it that, is no longer going to accept complaints by transgender students about discrimination. They say we have no jurisdiction over this.
Oh, I thought that was the Department of Education.
I read it as Justice, but all right, it could
Perhaps
be Education. The courts have ruled repeatedly that transgender students are covered under Title IX, under sex discrimination. So you do still have that recourse until Trump gets finished stacking the courts. And one of the ones he wants to put in, who is being stalled, is this Tennessee Senator Mark Norris in the federal district court in Western Tennessee. The Senate has not voted on his nomination yet. He has a long record of voter suppression, opposition to same-sex marriage, although he says he accepts the law now. They all come in and they say, well, that's the law now. Yes, that's a tautology, but when the Trump judges get in there, they'll overturn it.
Yes, the fact that they accept the reality of the law is certainly unusual in this administration. I will give you that. But it doesn't mean they're not going to try to change it when they get power.
I mean, this guy even supported letting therapists turn away gay clients. He's very anti-refugee, etc.
Then there's the Department of Health and Human Services, which is preparing a new religious exemption rule so that healthcare providers will not have to engage in any icky stuff they don't want to do, as long as they can assert a religious exemption, plus which, if their, say, hospital takes away their privileges, if they won't do the services the hospital wants to provide, then the hospital will be punished.
In fairness, this is somewhat of a reversion to what was done under George W. Bush and changed by Obama. But the guy who heads the Office of Human Rights in HHS, Roger Severino, is a longtime activist against abortion, against gay rights, etc. And by the way, on Friday, this is all in the run-up to the big anti-abortion march that's taking place on Friday in Washington.
Correct.
About Roe v. Wade.
There is one strange mystery event that took place in the administration this week that at first sounds one that hasn't been talked about so much. In the Health and Human Services Department, the head of the Office of Population Affairs was this woman, Teresa Manning, who we had talked about when she was first appointed. She's heading the Office of Family Planning and Population Affairs, and she's against contraception. She's against anything like that. Well, she got fired and escorted out of the building in about 3 seconds last week. They cleared the floor where she was working.
Did she have a gun? Was she exercising her Second Amendment rights?
They told everybody to get out of that floor and take their computers with them. And then they fired her and escorted her out of. We don't know.
It's a mystery.
However, she is being temporarily replaced by the woman who believes that abstinence education is the way to go for.
Oh, good. Nothing's going to change. Continuity.
But if you have any information on what the heck happened to Teresa Manning, please share it.
Trump also issued his proclamation for Religious Freedom Day this week. Here's a quote. No American, whether a nun, nurse, baker, or business owner, should be forced to choose between the tenets of faith or adherence to law.
How did they come up with that list?
He talks about in this thing Islamic terrorism, but not Christian terrorism, by the fine people of his base.
All right, so just another, and do we have any comment on the S-Holes meeting and all of that?
You know, I read a comment by somebody, just in the comment section of the paper, said it's the first time I cried over what's going on here. I mean, you know, you don't want this guy to get to you, but that's what I mean by things sinking so low, that this just despicable conduct, this, it's all this white supremacism, Norway, although, are we sure that Norway is a white majority country?
Well, the
head of Homeland Security isn't sure.
Yeah, well, my favorite comment on that was Stephen Colbert. Your name is Christian Nielsen with a silent J.
Well,
very cute.
And then there's this horrendous story of what the administration did this week to a gay Mexican immigrant asylum seeker. His name is Carlos Bringas Rodriguez. He's married to a guy, Michael Young, in Kansas City. And they took almost a month to get him back after he was illegally deported.
They came and got him in the middle of the night.
They said he missed an appointment that they sent to the wrong address purposely.
They did not. Their excuse was that he missed a court hearing on his deportation. He never got the notice of the hearing, Andy says, because they deliberately sent it elsewhere, but he didn't know about the hearing.
Right.
They came and got him in the middle of the night. They threw him into Mexico at 3 a.m. He's HIV positive. They gave him, let him take a few medicines, and now he's, abandoned in Mexico.
And he's married.
Meanwhile, the court that was hearing his asylum plea had said he had a right to asylum and could continue to petition for that. But the U.S. government ignored that court decision and got rid of him anyway.
Well, they ignored all the evidence in this case, and his testimony was that in his hometown of Veracruz, Mexico, he was raped and sexually abused by relatives and neighbors. And that's why he was seeking asylum since 2010.
The court did not ignore that evidence. They were giving him asylum.
The administration
The
did.
administration ignored everything, and just why they targeted him is a question. But they picked him up and threw him back into Mexico, literally. And it took more court orders to get him back here. He is now back here.
Well, speaking of courts, it's nice to see Senator Jeff Flake stand up to the fake news awards of Trump, but he votes for all these judges who are going to take away all our rights.
Yep.
All right.
As does Lindsey Graham.
So, protests.
All right. So,
well, in terms of protests against Trump, Adam Rippon, who's the first out gay male figure skater going to the Olympics for the United States at the age of 28, he came out publicly in 2015 and he said if he was invited to the White House, if he wins, he says, I don't think someone like me would be welcome there. I know what it's like to go into a room and feel you're not wanted. If I talk to people the way that President Trump talks to people, my mom would kick my ass, he said. And Gus Kenworthy, the free skier, also said he wouldn't go. He says, I have no interest in faking support.
Well, I guess the U.S. Olympic team is not going to be invited to the White
Well,
House.
we'll see.
Well,
by the way, we have the second openly gay figure skater from Canada, Eric Radford. He's going to be there. He's getting married to his Spanish boyfriend, who is an ice dancer, Luis.
there have been.
Faniero.
It's hard to imagine he's only the second.
No, in this Olympics. That's come out for this Olympics.
All right, let's move back to politics. Chelsea Manning, famously imprisoned, transgender activist, imprisoned for giving government classified information to WikiLeaks to expose the misdeeds of the U.S. government in Afghanistan and Iraq.
And was imprisoned in the longest sentence ever served by a whistleblower.
Considered by some a traitor, considered by others a hero.
There's quite a discussion even within the community.
Yes, there is. I think I certainly come down on the hero side because I'm always in favor of these whistleblowers. Chelsea Manning, Daniel Ellsberg, there's a long line. So Chelsea Manning is now living in Maryland and has decided to run for the United States Senate. But there's a sitting Democratic senator there, Ben Cardin, who I think is a perfectly decent senator.
He comes from a long line of Cardins in that seat. Everybody, it's a democracy. Anybody can run, and it's good for people to raise issues. Are we going to run Chelsea's ad or not?
Chelsea has done a political commercial that's a little dicey from our point of view, but we thought you'd be interested in seeing it. So let's take a look at Chelsea's first political ad.
I'm Chelsea Manning, and I approve this message.
We live in trying times. Times of fear. Of suppression. Of hate. We don't need more or better leaders. We need someone willing to fight. We need to stop asking them to give us our rights. They won't support us. They won't compromise. We need to stop expecting that our systems will somehow fix themselves. We need to actually take the reins of power from them. We need to challenge them at every level. We need to fix this. We don't need them anymore. We can do better. You're damn right we got this.
Well, I will give Chelsea credit for being bold. For someone who has been so vilified and imprisoned and everything else, she has not taken an inch step backwards.
No.
But it's a little scary.
There was a very strong message delivered by the Republican candidate for president last year about shaking up the system as well. And we do want it shaken up, and we do want better people.
Which is why we'll be out on the street on Saturday.
And I would like to get rid of the traitorous Democrat New York State Senator Jeff Klein now in the Bronx. This is one of the guys who caucuses with the Republicans to keep them in power in New York State Senate. And he's been accused of forcing his tongue down the mouth of a female colleague. He held a press conference about this before she came out with her accusation to deny it.
By the way, at the risk of stepping into quicksand, this Aziz Ansari debate, how can this anonymous woman is ruining his career for what was basically a bad date? How can she accuse him? I think people are missing the point. The point is that, there are women out there saying, he had no power. How can you talk about a power differential? He's a man. Of course he had power. That's the whole point of this discussion, that men do have power, that women concede that power or acknowledge that power by not getting up and walking out. Women stay in those situations because they don't want to be hated. They don't want to be slut-shamed. They don't want to be whatever. And are there gradations between Harvey Weinstein and Aziz Ansari? Of course. But the point is not these individual cases. The point is the overall need to change the power structure.
You know, we ran a video on the show once, and I invite you to just Google sexual consent under videos, and there are many videos about this, which will calmly explain what's involved in consent in a sexual relationship. People think, oh, I'm going to need a contract, and I'm going to need to video you agreeing to this beforehand. Just read about it, think about it, and make all your relationships be consensual.
Well, I saw a debate between two women this week on probably MSNBC. One with this sort of knee-jerk, how dare they reaction, and we have to draw a bright line between the Harvey Weinsteins and the Aziz. No, we have to look at the overall picture. And the other one said, look, what we need is early education of men and women to change the dynamic here. And that is what we need. We need people to go into these situations as colleagues, not adversaries.
It starts in grade school where, you know, boys often try to dominate discussions and things. I get hell if I interrupt Ann on this show. Some of you don't like when Ann interrupts me, but we try to have a conversation and respect each other.
And see, going to a private girls' school is what teaches you to be able to fight back.
I didn't interrupt girls at my high school because we didn't have any.
Exactly.
Except for a couple of teachers.
All right, back to politics. Governor Ralph Northam was sworn in as the new governor of Virginia, and his first act on his first day was to issue an executive order declaring a non-discrimination policy for state employees that covers sexual orientation and gender identity. Now, previous Governor McAuliffe also had a sexual orientation executive order for state employees, but Northam added gender identity
for the first time. And the Republicans in the legislature, they're still in a thin majority there. They've been chastened. They've introduced no bathroom bills and no anti-abortion measures.
Of course, it's early yet.
Well, but you know, these are the kinds of things that normally would be reintroduced on the first day.
Well, they lost 15 seats in the...
But Tennessee is not giving up. They've added a bunch of anti-LGBT bills again, including one. They will fund schools who need to defend their transphobic bathroom regulations.
In New Hampshire, the House there killed a proposed ban on conversion therapy for minors.
They said we don't need it. There's no evidence it happens.
The state can already punish coercion, and we need to help straight people who are concerned about their temporary gay crushes. They need this conversion therapy.
Well, they also said that the professional associations have the right to regulate what happens, and that had been happening before we started passing these laws. But you know, I'm for these laws. But that can happen.
Well, they're having a big fight over one in Tampa, Florida. They passed a conversion therapy ban, but the right wing, in the person of course, the Alliance Defending Freedom, and a couple of professionals, professional counselors, are going to court to try to overturn it on First Amendment grounds. Our side is fighting that, and that's going to turn into a big battle in Tampa.
In New Jersey, they swore in Governor Phil Murphy, and he said, I'm not going to run away from the progressive platform that I won the primary on. He wants legalized pot, a $15 minimum wage, a millionaire's tax, and a Bill of Rights for undocumented immigrants, and automatic voter registration, and early voting, and a right to join a party on the day of the election. So this is the kind, you know, when you get elected, you better satisfy what people have been yearning for, or you're not going to get reelected.
Well, I would say when you get elected on a platform like that, take the opportunity to push it instead of immediately falling back to some kind of more moderate position. Progressive attitudes are popular.
Well, I mean, when Barack Obama came in and he was supposed to reform health care, he compromised before he started. And that's how we ended up with the Affordable Care Act.
My point exactly.
Instead of saying, we need universal health insurance for everybody. We need Medicare for all. And then you might have had to make some compromises on that, but you don't start off with a compromise.
Be ambitious.
Right.
Matilda Krim would say be ambitious.
Hillary Clinton did the same thing when she tried to reform health care.
Yep.
You get tied up in knots. Besides which, it's much easier to explain to people when you say, oh, you see what old people have? Medicare. We're going to give it to everybody. And then you want to get something fancy for your nose job, you go right ahead.
In Kenosha, Wisconsin,
Yeah.
the school board is paying trans student Ash Whitaker $800,000 for pervasive, ongoing discrimination.
And the school district, Ash won at the appeals court level.
Did we show Ash's picture?
Yeah,
we have a picture of Ash.
somewhere?
Anyway, keep going.
Ash won at the appeals court level, and then part of this agreement is that the school district's not going to appeal to the Supreme Court. And they're also saying when Ash comes back for alumni activities, will not be discriminated against.
Nice.
He's now at the University of Wisconsin-Madison studying biomedical engineering.
In Utah, a trans man and a trans woman are suing for the ability to change their gender on their driver's licenses.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
In Wisconsin, this is not a specifically LGBT story, but we flipped a state Senate seat to the Democrats that had been in Republican hands since, as they say, the beginning of the century, 17 years ago, and that Trump won by 17 points. So that's all very encouraging.
There's a lot of mourning going on in the Wisconsin Republican Party right now.
Well, and we're awaiting
They're
the
scared.
Supreme Court decision about whether their maps were legal. Because they were drawn on a very highly partisan basis.
Speaking of maps, I'll take advantage of that segue. The Movement Advancement Project, known as MAP, has put out a new report on public accommodations non-discrimination laws. So this is a device that will show you all over the country what the state of non-discrimination laws is. So it's a very handy tool for you to figure out what you have in your area and what you don't have, and can be a great starting point for activism in your neighborhood. LGBTmap.org is where you will find that report on non-discrimination laws.
If you travel to Alabama, you won't be able to get a marriage license. Nobody can get a marriage license anymore in Alabama. They have ended them. Now you send the probate judge some kind of an affidavit, and you pay the same fee as you were going to pay for a marriage license. But it's obviously just a thing against us.
Well, it's a thing so that public officials do not have to conduct marriage ceremonies. You can't go to the local county clerk or whatever to have your marriage performed. Now you either have to go to a religious officiant or just do your own ceremony or just send them an affidavit. You don't even have to have
We're
a
married.
ceremony. Yeah, we have declared ourselves married.
That's how it used to work. People didn't start going to churches even for weddings until not too long ago.
Let's get to some sad stories of violence.
Terrible.
In L.A., California, a trans woman, Vicky Gutierrez, originally from Honduras, was murdered.
Well, it was a suspicious fire in her home in the Pico Union neighborhood on January 10th. I don't know how they've classified.
Well, they've
the crime.
arrested a suspect,
Yeah.
so
Right.
and quite quickly, actually, the local activists are praising the police for quick action.
And then there's the case in Lake Forest in California at a place called Borrego Park. A student, 19 years old, named Blaze Bernstein, he went missing on January 3rd, big search. He was found dead on January 10th. And they've arrested, that's a picture of Blaze. They've arrested a guy named Samuel Woodward, 20, who was an old classmate of his, that's him on the left, who allegedly stabbed him 20 times. Now, these two, they went to high school together, Blaze went on to University of Pennsylvania. The other kid stayed back in school here. They had been flirting a bit since June. Bernstein at the time told friends that Woodward was about to hit on him and made him promise not to tell. But then they agreed to get together on vacation And then Woodward is now saying to the police, first of all, he tried to cover up the crime, but then now he's trying to say, he came after me, and he's trying to use a gay panic defense, and I pushed him away and stabbed him 20 times to death. So anyway, and this kid Woodward had a deep background in far-right organizations, waving Confederate flags. It's a very messy story.
In another violent story, many years ago, in 1994, in fact, a lesbian in Brooklyn was raped in Prospect Park, but she was not treated well by the local news media and police. Columnist for the Daily News, Mike McAlery,
very famous Pulitzer Prize winner,
wrote horrible columns about her.
Getting fed news from the police, she wasn't raped, she's a lesbian, and they put all this in the stories to try to discredit her because they weren't getting to the bottom of the case.
Yeah.
And she sued the Daily News and Mike McAlery and didn't get anything because the court said, well, that's what the police told her. Who from the police told her this? John Miller.
Told him, not her.
Told Mike McAlery. John Miller, who is now, you see him on television all the time. He's the head of sort of the anti-terrorism unit in the New York City Police Department, but he used to be a correspondent on ABC and CBS and all these places. But, he's saying, I'm sorry about it, I didn't know, but...
He has now apologized because...
Apology not accepted by now New York City.
They finally investigated DNA evidence because she said she was raped, and they took DNA off her clothes, which they never did anything with. They have finally analyzed the DNA and connected it to a guy who's in prison for rape.
This guy, subsequent to this, raped 4 other women. So that's the consequence of them trying to cover up their misdeeds in this case. Outrageous.
Very outrageous. The cold case team at the NYPD did the investigation,
and credit
found
is being
it.
given to Chief O'Neill, who's the new police commissioner. He's not the chief; he's the commissioner. More harassment of male models. We told you a little bit about the misdeeds of Bruce Weber and Mario Testino. These are 2 of the top photographers to the royal family, to Vanity Fair, all these things. They've all been fired from everything at this point because all these models have come out of the woodwork and told these horrendous stories of the way these photographers treated them behind closed doors.
There's also bad lesbian behavior in the news. Melanie Williams-Bethea, who was the former administrator for financial aid at Columbia University Teachers College, has now been accused of taking kickbacks on financial aid.
She was in charge of it, so she was giving all the money to her girlfriends, and
hundreds of thousands of dollars to 3 women who were her girlfriends, who then kicked back a lot of it to her.
Who didn't even go to school.
Well, let's see. One had been a graduate student since 2007, but since at least 2010, she's not been taking classes or actively pursuing her degree. 2 others were enrolled since 2005 and have not obtained their degrees. Interesting little scheme.
Oh, what a tangled web we weave.
Not a good story.
All right.
Also not a good story. In Blount County, Tennessee, 2 Baptist churches have dropped out of a program to help homeless families after they found out that the program was helping a lesbian couple with 3 kids.
Well, heterosexuals can be bad too. You saw that story about that couple that had their 13 kids chained to the beds. Oh, wow. I mean, I wasn't going to talk about it, but just want to balance the news here.
And in Chicago, Illinois, North Park University, which is an evangelical Christian school associated with the Evangelical Covenant Church, has suspended Pastor Judy Peterson because she officiated at a same-sex wedding. There's Judy.
What about her religious freedom? At the University of Iowa, the Business Leaders in Christ group is suing for religious discrimination because they're not getting government funding because they exclude gay people who don't believe that homosexuality is wrong. It's a big case. And
If you have non-discrimination laws and you're discriminating, you don't get government funding. That's the same as with like Catholic adoption agencies who then complain that their religious freedom is being violated. No, you can have your religious freedom. You can do whatever you want, but you cannot expect government funding for discriminatory practices.
And in Arizona, dare I describe her as a bad lesbian, Kimberly McLaughlin is trying to overturn the high court decision that said, no, your wife also has rights to the child. She's saying, well, that's not Arizona law. Arizona law doesn't recognize automatic paternity.
You're married, you divorce, you have a child together, you both get to sue for custody and visitation.
She's appealing to the Supreme Court. Oh, and by the way, in Ohio, folks, they're finally starting to at least have hearings on the Fairness Act, the LGBT rights law bill there, for the first time in 10 years, so get on it.
When will that happen in the United States Congress?
Well, exactly.
All right, let's move on to international news because we don't have all the time in the world. All right, we told you last week about the Latin American, the Inter-American Court for Human Rights declaring marriage should be legal in all the countries that acknowledge them.
Costa Rica, it was a Costa Rican case. They're going along with it. We expect to have a marriage on Saturday there. We do. I think. Do we even have a picture? Maybe we don't. We don't. But anyway, and the president of the country said, you know, our citizens today are freer. So stuff is happening in Panama. In Haiti, there's resistance to the ruling. In Paraguay, the activists are pressing it. In Peru, they're examining the situation. In Ecuador, cases. Now, in a lot of these places, you have cases pending, especially for recognition of marriages performed elsewhere. And that's how they're starting in on this.
Well, and the point is that the courts in those cases are going to have to go by the ruling by the Inter-American Court. Haiti has a law against same-sex marriage, so someone's got to come up with a case there. Meanwhile, the European Court of Justice Advocate General issued an opinion that same-sex spouses must get full equal rights in all European Union countries. And there are some of those countries in Eastern Europe that do not recognize same-sex spouses. So this is a big upheaval there.
We've told you that things are opening up in India. They have now set hearings in March about the ban on gay sex, but they're also going to hear challenges to the adultery law and the law about women being allowed to enter a temple that they were excluded from.
And the out-gay Prince Manvendra Singh Gohil in India will build an LGBT center on his palace grounds. It will have rooms for people to stay, a medical clinic, English and vocational training. So things may be moving in India.
In Australia, Billie Jean King wants Margaret Court's name taken off the arena there, the tennis arena. She says if you're going to have your name on something, it's important that you be hospitable, inclusive, and welcoming.
She says...
this is why Trump has to put his own name on things, because no one would name anything after him.
Billie Jean says that anyone is welcome at her court at the U.S. Open, and
even Margaret Court.
Well, she was a big supporter of Margaret Court. She lobbied for this naming of the stadium, but she says she's heartbroken at what Margaret Court has said about her and us and everybody else since she became so fanatically Christian.
Margaret Court's the one who lost to Bobby Riggs, right?
Yes.
And Billie Jean did not want her to get pulled into that fight, but then she took it on afterwards herself.
Yes. Also, news from Australia, Cher will headline the Sydney 40th LGBT Mardi Gras on March 3rd. Get your tickets now, or go see her in Las Vegas.
Hey, Grindr users, a Chinese company now has full control of Grindr, and the concern here is security in terms of the Chinese government getting into these files and saying, we want to know about these people.
In Egypt, 9 more gay men have been arrested at a private house party for debauchery and being a threat to public security.
The police acted on a tip that weird men were visiting an apartment.
And they've proposed a whole new law to really, fully, completely outlaw homosexuality. And not just gay people will be illegal, but if you help gay people. If you run a bar that welcomes gay people, you can be prosecuted too.
That sounds like the California initiative that we defeated with Harvey Milk back in the 70s.
Well,
about teachers.
this is proposed. It hasn't been passed yet. We'll keep an eye on
And
it.
in Bermuda, cruise ships are canceling weddings on ships that are booked for July 2019. They're only going to do them through this month, I think.
But we're still waiting to see if the Governor General will sign or reject the repeal of marriage rights for same-sex couples and conversion to civil unions. So current cruise ship weddings will take place, but ones in the future are being canceled.
Okay.
And in Israel, they have a new system that is more advanced than the United States. They are going to allow gay men to donate blood.
Yes.
The blood will be checked when it's donated, then frozen for 4 months, then checked again, and
Should do that for everybody.
They should do that for everybody. They're going to do this for a 2-year trial and see how it works out, and then maybe they will do it for everybody. And in other AIDS news, White House Press Secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders, who's, liar in chief. I don't know who's a bigger liar, her
I don't know
or
why
Trump.
they go to these press conferences.
I don't either. They should just go and say, liar, liar, pants on fire. Anyway, she was asked about the firing of the HIV/AIDS Council and whether it would be replaced. The Washington Blade's Chris Johnson asked her about that. And she says, we're looking at different options. Meaning, leave me alone, we're not doing anything about this.
Better news, we've been telling you about it, but now Florida is offering PrEP at all 67 local county health offices. Florida has the 3rd highest rate of new HIV infections in the country, and your PrEP will be free.
Excellent. Not so good news, a new court case in Brooklyn, New York. Avril Nolan is a young woman whose picture, for whatever reason, was on Getty Images.
Yes.
So the New York State Division of Human Rights takes that picture without consulting Avril and makes this poster saying, I am positive, meaning HIV positive, I have rights.
And now they're trying to say, oh, well, there's
wait a
nothing
minute.
wrong with having HIV.
Avril is not
No.
HIV positive.
But the picture was taken for an article about New Yorkers' tastes in music for an online publication. I mean, she's not a model. This guy sold a picture that he took a while ago and put it into a file, and they just pulled it up. I mean, I think she's got a case.
So she sues and says, excuse
for
me,
$1.5 million.
I don't have HIV. You've grabbed my picture for no good reason without consulting me. And New York State says, well, there's no problem with HIV. Why are you upset? And the court, the appellate division here, says HIV continues to be a significant stigma, therefore she can sue.
She could call the Speaker of the Council, Corey Johnson, as a witness. I mean, he has come out about having HIV, but, he didn't want to do that right away, and it took him a while to be public about it because people don't want to talk about it these days in many cases. And some people think that shame has gotten even higher in some cases because, you're expected to, you're supposed to know about this, and people come out less. And also they don't have to come out because they have drugs.
They stole her picture and they said something about her with the picture that's not true.
Yes.
That alone should be worth a major award.
Models agree to appear in drug ads for which they're not.
But agree.
Agree, yes.
And drug companies, if they're saying someone is HIV positive in an ad, do use HIV positive models.
Well.
And gay couples have sued when right-wing groups have used pictures of them in anti-gay ads.
Yes, I agree. I think she's got a good case. I know Ann doesn't like me to talk about these things, but there's a new HIV vaccine research thing in San Diego that Fauci calls an excellent study.
Oh, come on. Do you want to make the list of Fauci's promises is equal to the list of Trump's lies.
Are you saying, why does he still have that job? Because
Yes.
he's been there since the very beginning.
Oh, my God.
All right.
We all
hope
desire
for
a cure.
Yes, we do.
Meanwhile, test and treat.
Okay. Entertainment news?
Yes.
All right.
Congratulations to Ricky Martin and Juan Yosef. who married recently, and we have a picture of the happy couple.
There's Ricky on the right there, and I'm going to be watching him. We're taping on Wednesday tonight in the assassination of Gianni Versace. He plays Gianni's lover.
And Juan is a well-known artist of Arab descent. And there were a couple of articles this week about an exhibition in Detroit at the Arab American Museum that includes a gay artist, not Juan, another one. But that's getting some notice.
Now, we went to the opera.
Dearborn.
We
Yes,
went to
we
the opera.
did.
Now, it's only about the 4th opera I've seen in my life. This one is called Fellow Travelers at the Prototype Festival, and it's based on a Thomas Mallon novel about the McCarthy-era witch hunt of gays. And I'll tell you, it makes me sorry. I've been passing up opera all these years because I was extremely moved by this. And it's about love in the shadows in the 50s, where you could get fired and there were people always looking at you and trying to investigate you and get you thrown out of there. The composer was Gregory Spears. And
I particularly enjoyed the libretto. I thought it was really well written. Greg Pierce did the libretto. But
of course,
it's gotten excellent reviews.
We've been talking about it all through this show. Our government still doesn't protect our equal rights in this country. So you're watching this like it's some artifact from 60-something years ago,
And people are in the audience who don't know the history are sort of gasping at some of the things that happened.
It still goes on. By the way, the woman in it, Devin Guthrie, who played the best friend of one of them and worked for the other, she was just terrific.
So this opera is, first of all, executive produced by our old friend Sterling Zinsmeier, who was an activist in New York for many years, now lives in Santa Fe. It originated at the Cincinnati Opera, and it's regarded as a chamber opera, a smaller opera, but it's already being produced not only in New York, but next in Chicago, where it's being produced by Renee Fleming, the famous soprano, at the Chicago Lyric Opera in March, and then at the Minneapolis Opera in June.
The Minnesota Opera, I think, is what don't they call it the Minnesota Opera? Or is it Minneapolis?
Minneapolis.
Okay.
That's the way I wrote it down, but it's in Minneapolis.
June 16th through 23rd.
Yeah, all right.
In Minneapolis.
This Friday, American Masters, Lorraine Hansberry on PBS, and it will be repeated. Look for that, the great lesbian playwright who died young of cancer.
And then the NBC series called Rise, which is due in March, is about a true story about a U.S. drama teacher putting on a high school production of Spring Awakening, controversial musical. But the producer, Jason Katims. He's changing the teacher's sexuality from gay to heterosexual so people can connect more with the character.
No, so he can connect more with the story.
Oh, we're going to explore gay issues, but come on.
And we gave him an alcoholic son, so what do you want? I saw a couple of movies this weekend, Molly's Game, which I thought was pretty good, and The Shape of Water, which I now think is the movie of the year. Do yourself a favor, go see The Shape of Water.
Interspecies love.
Excellent. And
go ahead.
Timothy Chalamet is donating his fee from the newest Woody Allen movie to Time's Up, the feminist group, the LGBT Center in New York, and the Rape, Abuse, and Incest National Network.
And I saw John Lithgow in Stories by Heart. It's a one-man show, very deeply moving. He not only reads stories that he was told as a kid from a book that his father read, who was a theater producer, but he talks about his father in such moving terms. It's a wonderful show. Treat yourself.
And we mourn the death of Carol Hart, who made Free to Be You and Me, which was almost censored by ABC. They didn't want Rosie Greer to do It's Okay to Cry by Boys, Too Gay.
So it's only January, but I'm already exhausted. The news has really picked up.
But we'll be marching on Saturday. Hope to see you there. Women's March 2018. Google it.
Bye-bye.